I never thought my life would amount to more than brewing coffee for people who barely noticed me. Every night, as I walked through the glass doors of Stratosphere Technologies, I felt like a ghost in a building full of gods. The office on the 37th floor was sleek, modern, glowing under cold LED lights that made everything look like it belonged in a sci-fi movie. I didn't. My faded sneakers squeaked against the polished marble floors, and my khaki apron smelled faintly of espresso and cleaning detergent. They called me Claire, the coffee girl, the one who always had an awkward smile, the one who never spoke unless spoken to. I kept my head down. It was easier that way. Every night I restocked their gourmet beans, cleaned up their half-drunk lattes, and wiped down tables they'd left littered with crumpled napkins and overpriced takeout containers. Occasionally, someone would nod at me in the elevator, but most of the time, I was invisible. I didn't mind, or at least that's what I told myself. I'd learned early on that dreams don't pay hospital bills. Not when your mom's lying in a hospice bed with tubes running from her frail arms. Not when the world doesn't care how hard you're willing to work, as long as you don't have the right degree or the right connections. But that night was different. It was nearly midnight. Most of the staff had gone home hours ago, but the corner office was still lit up. From where I stood with my cart of supplies, I could see faint silhouettes moving inside, hear muffled laughter and the clinking of glasses. A celebration, maybe. Or a high-stakes meeting. I didn't know and didn't care. I was just there to clean up after them. Still, as I passed the office door, my eyes caught on something lying on the conference table. A thick binder, its pages bristling with sticky notes. And on the front, printed in neat black letters, was something I hadn't seen in years. Japanese. My chest tightened. I hadn't spoken a word of Japanese since college, back when I was young and stupid enough to believe I'd be an interpreter someday, before Mom's heart gave out, and bills piled higher than my student loans. I should have kept walking. I should have pretended I didn't see it, but for some reason I couldn't. I pushed the cart aside and stepped closer, my heart thudding louder with every step. And that's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps. Firm. Measured. Coming closer. I froze. The door swung open. And there he was. Ethan Ward. The CEO. The man whose face I'd seen on Forbes covers and tech blogs, who built a billion-dollar empire from scratch, and was known for being as ruthless as he was brilliant. He stared at me. Then his eyes flicked to the binder in my hands, and for the first time, someone really saw me. But not in the way I'd hoped. I told myself it was none of my business. I wasn't paid to care about what these people did in their glass-walled offices. I was there to sweep the floors, empty their trash cans, and make sure their espresso machine didn't clog up. That was it. But something about that binder pulled at me. It sat there on the conference table like an invitation I wasn't supposed to accept. The cover was simple white, with clean black letters printed across the front. But those letters weren't in English. They were in Japanese. For a moment, I just stood there clutching my cleaning rag, my heart thumping harder than it had any right to. It had been years since I'd last seen Japanese characters outside of a textbook. Years since I'd whispered conjugations to myself on late-night bus rides home from the community college I could no longer afford. 1,000 memories flashed through my mind in an instant. Study groups in cramped dorm rooms, the feeling of pride the first time I held a full conversation in Japanese, and the crushing disappointment when I had to drop out and take 2 jobs to keep my mom alive. My fingers itched. Just a peek, I told myself. Just to see if I still remembered anything at all. I set down my rag, glanced at the glass door to make sure no one was around, and stepped closer. The binder was thick and heavy. My palms felt clammy as I ran a finger over the plastic cover. Slowly, carefully, I lifted it and flipped to the first page. Contracts, negotiations, legal terms I hadn't seen in years. I started reading, sounding the words out silently in my head, and to my surprise, I understood. Not every word, not perfectly, but enough to piece together what it said. It was a partnership agreement with a Japanese tech firm, a big one judging by the numbers I saw. And then I noticed something odd. There, buried in the dense paragraphs, was a clause that didn't make sense. In Japanese it said one thing, but in the English translation scribbled in the margin the meaning had shifted. Subtly, but dangerously. My eyes narrowed. If this was signed as is, Stratosphere Technologies could be exposed to penalties worth millions if the deal went south. I swallowed hard, my stomach nodding. This wasn't my problem. I was the coffee girl, not a lawyer, not a translator. If anyone saw me touching this, I could get fired on the spot. And yet, my fingers brushed the edge of the page. I wanted to keep reading. I needed to. But before I could turn another page, I heard it. A sound that made every muscle in my body go rigid. The soft click of the door handle turning. The door creaked open, and I froze. My heart pounded in my ears as I looked up, clutching the binder, like it was evidence of a crime. Ethan Ward stepped into the room. He was taller than I remembered from the few times I'd glimpsed him in passing broad shoulders, under an immaculate navy suit. Dark hair swept back, and those pale blue eyes that made him look carved from ice. He didn't say a word at first. His gaze dropped to the binder in my hands, then back to me. One brow arched slightly, and the corner of his mouth curled not into a smile, but something colder. "Well," he said, his voice calm but edged with amusement. "This is interesting. I'm sorry," I stammered, fumbling to close the binder. "I was just cleaning. I didn't mean to read confidential documents." He finished for me. His tone light, but laced with sarcasm. "Because, from where I'm standing, it looks like you were very much meaning to." My cheeks burned. I wanted to explain, to tell him about the mistranslation, about how I was only trying to help. But the words caught in my throat. He took a few steps closer, his polished shoes silent on the carpet. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "You know," he said, slowly tilting his head. "Most people would have just wiped down the table and moved along. But not you." I clutched the binder tighter, my fingers trembling. His eyes flicked to the Japanese characters on the cover. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "If you're so smart," he said, voice dropping low, then translate it. The challenge hung in the air between us like a blade. I couldn't get his eyes out of my head. Cold, piercing, like they'd stripped me bare in an instant and found me lacking. All night I tossed and turned in my tiny studio apartment, staring at the cracks in the ceiling as if they held answers. But no matter how many times I replayed it, the memory felt the same shame curling in my stomach as Ethan Ward's voice echoed in my ears. "If you're so smart, then translate it." It wasn't just the words. It was the way he'd said them, smooth, controlled, dripping with amusement, like I was some sort of amusing insect he'd found crawling across his desk. And the worst part, I had translated it perfectly. I'd read the clause aloud, my voice trembling at first, but gaining strength with every syllable. I'd pointed out the mistranslation explained how it could cost the company millions. For a single dizzying moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his expression. Surprise, maybe even respect. But then it was gone. Interesting. He'd murmured, his tone so flat it felt like a slap. And just like that, he dismissed me. Now, as I stood in the break room clutching my lukewarm coffee, I could still feel that humiliation crawling under my skin. I wasn't supposed to be in that room. I wasn't supposed to touch that binder. And yet part of me didn't regret it. Part of me, some stubborn, foolish part, was proud I'd spoken up, even if it meant I was probably going to lose this job. I stared down at the swirling brown liquid in my paper cup, my reflection rippling back at me. Just keep your head down, I whispered to myself. You need this paycheck. Don't make it worse. But deep down, I knew it was already too late. The call came just after lunch. I was restocking the sugar packets in the break room, trying to keep my hands busy, and my mind from spiraling back to the night before, when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. Claire Dawson. Yes. This is Linda from Human Resources. Could you come up to the 12th floor? Now, please. My stomach dropped. Of course, I managed to say, though my voice cracked slightly. The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, frozen, the tiny white packets of sweetener slipping from my fingers and scattering across the countertop. This is it, I thought. They're going to fire me. By the time I stepped into the HR office, my palms were damp, and my throat felt dry as sandpaper. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and corporate anxiety. Behind the desk sat Linda, the HR manager, her perfectly curled hair and tight smile giving nothing away. Have a seat, Miss Dawson. I obeyed, folding my hands tightly in my lap. You understand why you're here, don't you? She said. I swallowed hard. Yes, I said softly. I was in the conference room last night. I saw a document I shouldn't have. Correct, she said briskly. Our company policy is very clear about unauthorized personnel viewing sensitive material. It's a serious breach of protocol. I understand, I murmured. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. She sighed, tapping her pen against a folder on her desk. Unfortunately, Miss Dawson, this isn't something we can just... The door behind me opened. I turned, and there he was. Ethan Ward, the CEO himself, striding in like he owned the air in the room, because in a way he did. Linda, he said smoothly. I'll take it from here. Linda blinked, clearly startled. Sir, I was just... I know, Ethan interrupted, his voice calm, but with an edge of finality. But I'd like to speak with Miss Dawson privately. Linda hesitated, then gathered her folder and stood. Of course, she said tightly. I'll leave you to it. As the door clicked shut behind her, the silence in the room thickened. Ethan's pale blue eyes settled on me, sharp and unreadable. I gripped the edge of my chair, willing myself not to shrink under his gaze. Ethan didn't sit. He stood by the window, one hand in his pocket, staring out at the skyline, as if the glowing city below held the answer to some unspoken question. You're in a difficult position, Miss Dawson, he said. Finally, his voice calm, measured. I stayed silent. My throat felt tight. You violated company protocol last night. He continued, turning slightly toward me. But you also caught an error in that contract, an error that could have cost us millions. His eyes locked on mine. So tell me, why were you even looking at that binder? I hesitated. I used to study Japanese in college, I said quietly, before I had to drop out. And now you're... Here, he said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Yes, I said firmly, refusing to look away. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he crossed the room, moving like a predator sizing up prey. I'm going to make you an offer, he said. I held my breath. You can stay on as an intern. No pay. No guarantees. But you'll sit in on meetings, observe cases, and if you're as smart as you think you are, maybe prove you're worth investing in. My stomach churned. An unpaid internship. After everything, I stood slowly, my hands clenched at my sides. With all due respect, I said, my voice low but steady, I'm not looking for charity. His smirk faded. This isn't charity, he said. It's a chance. No, I shot back. A chance would mean you see my value and are willing to pay for it. This is a favor disguised as an opportunity. His jaw tightened. I don't do favors, Miss Dawson, he said coldly. Then we agree, I said, stepping toward the door. I'll keep brewing your coffee, but don't expect me to beg for scraps. I left without looking back, my pulse pounding in my ears. There was a time when I thought my life would be different. I can still picture the campus in Boston, the red brick buildings, the smell of old books and coffee hanging in the air, as I hurried between classes with my Japanese textbooks clutched to my chest. Back then, I believed in the kind of future you see in movies, the one where hard work and passion are enough to get you where you want to be. I wanted to become a translator for the UN, or maybe work for an international law firm traveling the world, negotiating deals in 3 different languages before lunch. I was 19, young, hopeful, stupid. Then the call came. Your mother's in the hospital. Heart failure. Everything after that became a blur. The first trip home, thinking it would just be for a week. Then the mounting bills. The late-night conversations with insurance companies. The way my mom smiled through the pain and told me, don't you dare give up your dream for me. But dreams don't pay for prescriptions. So I left Boston. I traded classrooms for coffee shops, textbooks for time cards. I told myself it would be temporary just until Mom got better. That was 5 years ago. Now here I am, 27, cleaning up after people half my age who make more in a week than I do in a year. Sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if I could have fought harder to stay. If there's a version of me somewhere out there, one who never left, who's fluent in Japanese and traveling the world, like she always dreamed. But that version doesn't exist. I exist. And right now, my only priority is keeping my mom alive. These days, my life is split in 2. By night, I push a cleaning cart through the gleaming halls of Stratosphere Technologies, trying not to let the stairs, or the way no one stares at all, get to me. By day, I pour coffee for impatient commuters at a corner cafe, smiling through exhaustion as they bark orders without ever meeting my eyes. 2 jobs, 16 hours a day. It's barely enough. I thought maybe the overtime shifts and the double tips would cover Mom's new medications. But every time I check the pharmacy bill, it feels like trying to bail out the ocean with a teacup. Every visit to the hospice leaves me a little more hollow. Today, she was lying in bed when I walked in the sunlight, streaming across her thinning hair. She turned her head slowly, her face lighting up as best it could. Claire, she whispered, her voice raspy. I forced a smile. Hey, Mom, I brought you tea. The herbal one you like. She tried to sit up, but the effort left her coughing. I set the cup down and adjusted her pillows gently. You've been working too hard, she said once she caught her breath. You've got those tired eyes again. I'm fine, I lied. She wasn't. Her hands felt smaller every time I held them. Her heart monitor beeped steadily beside us, each sound reminding me how fragile this all was. "Promise me you're not giving up on yourself," she murmured. I couldn't answer. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure if I still had a self left to fight for. Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, the city lights flickering in the glass behind him. The office was quiet now, the kind of stillness that made even his own breathing feel too loud. Claire Dawson. Her name was printed neatly at the top of the employee file in his hands. He wasn't sure why he'd asked for it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the way she'd stood there in the conference room, clutching that binder, like it was a lifeline, refusing to lower her eyes, even when she knew she'd crossed a line. She'd surprised him. Most people in her position would have stumbled over apologies, begged to keep their job. But Claire, she hadn't flinched. She had corrected him, and she had been right. He flipped to the next page of her file, scanning the sparse history. No degree, no fancy internships. A list of low-wage jobs, barista, cashier, janitorial staff. It didn't fit. Why would someone who could read and analyze a Japanese legal document be pushing a coffee cart? His eyes caught on a line near the bottom. Awarded full academic scholarship to Boston University Department of Modern Languages. Withdrew sophomore year due to family medical emergency. A full scholarship. Ethan set the folder down slowly, his fingers drumming against the polished wood of his desk. For a moment, he wasn't in his high-rise corner office anymore. He was 12 years old again, sitting on the edge of a threadbare couch in a cramped apartment in Detroit, listening to his mother cry quietly in the kitchen because they couldn't afford the rent. She'd worked 2 jobs to keep him in school, told him every single day, "Don't you let where we come from decide where you're going." And he hadn't. But somewhere along the way he'd stopped looking back. Until Claire, until this girl with tired eyes and calloused hands had reminded him what it felt like to be underestimated. He closed the file and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Was she reckless? Yes, but maybe, just maybe. She wasn't wrong to take the risk. I was supposed to be invisible. That's the unspoken rule, when you're the one holding the mop. You walk quietly, you keep your head down, and you pretend you don't hear the deals being made in the rooms you're scrubbing clean. But sometimes, no matter how much you try, the words still reach you. It was nearly midnight, and I was wiping down the glass walls of Conference Room C when the voices drifted out into the hallway. They weren't loud. In fact, most people probably wouldn't have noticed. But working nights had sharpened my ears. 2 men spoke in measured tones, their English tinged with the rounded vowels of a Korean accent. Clause 14. One of them said, "You are comfortable with this interpretation." I slowed my hand on the glass, my rag catching on the edge of the window frame. A deeper voice answered the company's lead counsel I recognized. "Yes, it's clear. Both parties accept financial liability equally." But something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. Equally, I'd heard that word before. And in Korean, in certain contexts, it didn't always mean what English speakers thought it did. My fingers tightened around the spray bottle. This wasn't my place. I wasn't supposed to be listening, much less questioning a room full of executives and lawyers. But what if they were getting it wrong? What if this deal collapsed because no one bothered to check the meaning behind a single word? I pressed my forehead lightly against the cool glass, trying to will the thought out of my head. "Stay quiet, Claire. You've caused enough trouble already. And yet, the memory of Ethan's eyes the other night, the way they flickered just for a second when I spoke up, wouldn't leave me. Maybe this wasn't about me. Maybe it was about not letting another mistake slide by while I stood there silent. The words echoed in my head, long after I moved away from the glass. Both parties accept financial liability equally, except that wasn't what the original Korean phrase implied. Not exactly. It was more like the first party assumes primary responsibility unless certain conditions are met. It was a subtle difference, but a dangerous one. I gripped the handle of my cleaning cart tighter, my knuckles white. This wasn't my fight. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't even an intern. I was a janitor who'd already gotten in trouble once for sticking her nose where it didn't belong. If I said something now and I was wrong, it would be the end of this job. But what if I'm right? I thought of the look on Ethan's face that night, the flicker of surprise when I'd read from the Japanese contract, the way his smirk had faltered for just a moment. And then I thought of my mom lying in that hospice bed. How many times had she told me, "Claire, don't ever let them make you small"? I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, my thumb hovering over the email app. Don't do it. Just walk away. This isn't your problem. But if I walked away, and they signed that contract with the error, the company could lose millions. People could lose their jobs. And I'd have to live with knowing I stayed silent. My thumb tapped the screen before I could stop myself. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling so hard I could barely type. Subject, urgent. Clause 14. Translation issue. I stared at the blinking cursor, to every instinct in me screaming to delete the draft and pretend I hadn't heard a thing. But I couldn't. If I didn't say something and this went wrong, I'd never forgive myself. I took a shaky breath and started typing. Mr. Ward, please forgive me for overstepping, but I believe there's a serious error in the translation of Clause 14 in the contract with your Korean partners. The original phrasing places primary financial responsibility on the first party, unless specific liquidity conditions are met. However, the current English version incorrectly suggests shared liability. If signed as is, Stratosphere could face significant financial risk. I understand this is outside my role, but I couldn't stay silent. Respectfully, Claire Dawson. I read it over 3 times, then hovered over the send button. This could go one of 2 ways. Either he'd thank me, or I'd be unemployed by morning. My thumb pressed send before I could think too hard. And then silence. I went back to scrubbing counters, my mind racing. 5 minutes passed, then 10. In the conference room, the muffled voices grew louder. Chairs scraped against the floor. And then, nothing. The door opened. I glanced up just in time to see Ethan step out, phone in hand, his expression unreadable. He spoke quietly to one of the lawyers, who nodded pale-faced, before disappearing down the hall. Ethan's eyes flicked in my direction for the briefest second. Not a glare. Not a smirk. Just a look. And then he turned and walked away. I didn't know if I was safe, but deep down, I had the strangest feeling I'd just changed something. Maybe not for me, but for them. The next morning there was a new note on my locker. Report to Records Archive. Basement level. Effective immediately. At first I thought it was a mistake, but when I walked into the janitorial office, my supervisor avoided my eyes. Orders from upstairs, he said flatly, sliding a key across the desk. You're reassigned to storage cleanup until further notice. No explanation. No warning. Just like that, I was sent underground. The basement of Stratosphere Technologies was nothing like the gleaming glass towers above. The air smelled of dust and mildew, and the single flickering bulb in the corner barely cut through the gloom. Rows of metal shelves stretched into the shadows, stacked high with old files, broken office chairs, and boxes labeled in smudged marker. It was the company's graveyard where things went to be forgotten, and now so had I. I dragged my cart down the narrow aisle, the wheels squeaking against the cracked linoleum. This wasn't about cleaning. This was about sending a message. The board didn't like what I'd done correcting their lawyers, pointing out an error that embarrassed one of their senior partners. They couldn't fire me outright, not after I'd saved them from a multi-million-dollar mistake. So instead, they buried me, out of sight, out of mind. I pulled on a pair of work gloves and forced myself to start sorting through the dusty folders. My chest ached, but I kept moving because if I stopped for even a second, I was afraid the anger boiling inside me would spill over. Was this all I'd ever be? The girl who knew too much to stay silent, but not enough to be taken seriously. Above me in the world of polished offices and boardrooms, deals were still being made. But here in the basement, I was nothing but a ghost. Meanwhile, 24 floors above the cold, dusty basement, Ethan Ward stood at the head of the boardroom table, his jaw tight and fingers drumming against the polished mahogany surface. The air in the room was thick with tension. "You can't be serious," Ethan said. Gerald Quinn, one of the older board members, his tone dripping with condescension. "You want to pull resources to create some outreach program for janitors and interns." Ethan's pale blue eyes narrowed. "I'm not talking about outreach," he said evenly. "I'm talking about cultivating raw talent, people with ability but no access to traditional pipelines, people we're already overlooking." Sophia Hale, another senior partner, leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "And I suppose you're thinking of making this Claire Dawson your poster child for this grand experiment." Her voice curled around Claire's name, like it was something bitter on her tongue. Ethan's expression didn't change, but his fingers curled slightly on the table's edge. "She caught a translation error that would have cost us $40 million, he said, while pushing a mop. "Lucky guess," Quinn muttered. No, Ethan shot back. "Not luck. Skill. Dedication. She used to have a full academic scholarship until she gave it up to care for her mother." How many people in this building could do what she did under those circumstances? Silence. He let the question hang in the air, his gaze sweeping the room. "I'm proposing we launch a pilot program, Legal Fellows. We identify candidates with untapped potential and train them. Proper mentorship, hands-on experience, and a clear path into the profession. And what happens when one of them embarrasses us in front of a client?" Sophia countered. "Our reputation isn't built on charity cases." Ethan's voice hardened. "Our reputation isn't worth a damn if we can't recognize brilliance because it comes in the wrong uniform." For a moment, no one spoke. He didn't expect them to understand. They'd all been born with doors wide open, never knowing what it felt like to bang on them until their knuckles bled. But he had, and maybe that's why Claire Dawson's stubborn, unpolished defiance had gotten under his skin. "This isn't optional," Ethan said finally, his tone like steel. "We can either lead the way in shaping the next generation or get left behind by those who do." When I arrived for my shift that night, there was an envelope taped to my locker. My name was written across the front in bold, clean strokes. Claire Dawson. I peeled it off slowly, my fingers hesitant. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, the company's crest stamped in gold at the top. Stratosphere Technologies invites you to join the Legal Fellows Program, a pilot initiative designed to provide training and mentorship to individuals with exceptional potential from non-traditional backgrounds. Your skills and initiative have not gone unnoticed. We believe you can make a meaningful contribution if you're willing to accept the challenge. Ethan Ward. I read it twice, then a third time. By the fourth, my hands were shaking. This couldn't be real. A week ago, I was wiping down tables and refilling sugar packets. Now they were asking me to sit in conference rooms and train, alongside people with Ivy League degrees. It felt wrong. Too sudden. Too convenient. I sank onto the bench, staring at the letter like it might bite me. Was this really an opportunity? Or just another trap? A way to keep me quiet, to dangle something shiny in front of me, so I wouldn't make any more noise about mistranslated contracts or boardroom politics. Don't be stupid, Claire, I told myself. This is your chance. You've waited your whole life for something like this. But another voice whispered louder. Be careful. Nothing in this world is free. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope, my mind spinning. If I said yes, I could finally prove myself. If I said no, I might never get another shot. But what if saying yes meant losing something more important, my self-respect? Is this an opportunity or a trap? The first day of the program felt like walking into another universe. The conference room wasn't the polished, soulless space I was used to cleaning. It had been transformed whiteboards filled with legal jargon, sleek laptops humming softly, and a fresh tray of pastries that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. And then there were them, the other fellows. 6 of them all bright-eyed and impeccably dressed. Designer watches, leather briefcases, tailored blazers that screamed legacy money. They glanced up as I walked in. I saw the flicker of recognition in their eyes, the way they took in my thrift store blazer and scuffed shoes. The silence was sharp. I felt every threadbare inch of my outfit every hour I'd spent scrubbing floors while they were debating case law in ivy-covered lecture halls. Hi, I managed, forcing my voice steady. I'm Claire. A tall guy with perfect hair and a Harvard crest on his laptop gave me a polite, thin smile. Claire, he prompted. I hesitated. Dawson. He nodded once, then went back to typing, clearly uninterested. The others murmured their names. Ava, Tyler, Priya James, but it felt more like a formality than a welcome. I took the empty seat at the far end of the table, clutching my notebook like a shield. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I didn't belong here. The case study was brutal. A cross-border dispute between 2 multinational companies over a breach of contract laced with technical terms and clauses that made my head spin. We had 3 hours to prepare an analysis. I buried myself in the documents, scribbling notes as fast as my hand could move. Every time I looked up, the others were already in pairs, whispering ideas to each other, like they'd been doing this their whole lives. I was alone. When it was my turn to present, I stood at the front of the room, gripping my notebook so tightly, I thought the cardboard cover might tear. I took a breath and began. The clause in question violates proportionality under international commercial law. Specifically, the penalty imposed exceeds the threshold set by the Vienna Convention weight. The interruption came from Marcus, the Harvard guy, with the perfect hair. He leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled. Are you sure about that? He asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. Because last I checked, that convention isn't enforceable in this jurisdiction. A few of the others smirked. My stomach twisted, but I forced my voice steady. Yes, I said firmly. It's enforceable because both parties opted into the Vienna Convention under the governing law clause. Page 7, paragraph 3. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Really? I walked over to his copy of the contract, flipped it open and pointed to the line. Right here, I said. The smirk slid off his face. The room went quiet. I could feel Ethan's eyes on me from the back watching. For the first time all day I didn't feel small. The silence hung in the air like a held breath. Marcus's smirk was gone, replaced by a faint flush creeping up his neck. He looked down at the contract, as if hoping the words on the page would rearrange themselves and prove me wrong. But they didn't. I straightened my shoulders, my voice steady now. As I was saying, the penalty clause is unenforceable because it violates proportionality under the Vienna Convention. If we fail to challenge it, our client risks paying damages far beyond what's reasonable under international law. I closed my notebook and met the instructor's gaze. She smiled an expression that was equal parts surprise and approval. "Well done, Ms. Dawson," she said. "That's exactly the analysis I was looking for." A ripple of applause broke out around the room. Not polite, not obligatory. Real. Even Marcus joined in, though he avoided my eyes. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. At the back of the room, Ethan stood with his arms crossed, watching. For once, his expression wasn't unreadable. There was pride there, subtle, but unmistakable. But I didn't linger on it. I didn't want his approval. I wanted to prove to him, to myself, that I belonged here. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to. The call came just after midnight. I was hunched over my notes in the dim light of my studio apartment diagrams, and case files spread across the tiny kitchen table. My phone buzzed once, twice, then stilled. When I saw the hospital's number flash across the screen, my heart stopped. "This is Dr. Patel," the voice said when I answered. "Your mother's condition has worsened. We've moved her to intensive care." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Is she—" The word caught in my throat. "She's stable for now," the doctor said gently. "But we'll need to discuss treatment options soon. I'm afraid they won't be cheap." Of course they wouldn't. I ended the call with shaking hands, staring blankly at the papers in front of me. Legal theory, international law, arbitration clauses. None of it mattered right now. My mom was all I could think about. The woman who sacrificed everything to keep me afloat. The reason I'd walked away from my scholarship years ago. The reason I'd been cleaning floors at Stratosphere in the first place. And now, when she needed me most, I was sitting in a fancy fellowship program trying to prove myself to people who'd never had to choose between groceries and medicine. I pressed my palms to my face, willing the tears not to fall. Do I quit? The question sat heavy in my chest. If I left the program, I could pick up extra shifts, pay the bills, be by her side. If I stayed, I risked losing her. But if I stayed, maybe, just maybe, I could build the kind of life where neither of us had to suffer like this again. I didn't know which choice hurt more. The knock came just as the sun was rising. I'd been sitting on the floor all night, my back pressed to the wall, staring at the hospital forms spread across the coffee table. Numbers and words swam before my eyes. Treatment estimates, payment plans, overdue notices. Another knock. Firmer this time. I dragged myself up still in the same wrinkled t-shirt from yesterday. When I opened the door, my breath caught. Ethan Ward stood there. No tailored suit, no expensive watch. Just a gray sweater and dark jeans, his hair slightly mussed like he hadn't slept either. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he held up a paper bag. "Coffee," he said. "I didn't know if you'd eaten." I blinked at him, too tired to process. "How do you even know where I live?" He hesitated. "Let's just say I have resources. I should have slammed the door. Should have told him to mind his own business. Instead, I stepped aside. 5 minutes, I said flatly. He nodded and entered, his eyes sweeping over the cramped studio apartment. The peeling paint, the stack of pharmacy receipts on the counter, the folded cot where I'd been sleeping so I could give my mom the only bed. "This isn't what I imagined," he murmured. I crossed my arms. "Why are you here, Mr. Ward?" He turned to face me, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it. "Because you're about to walk away," he said, "and I can't let that happen." I let out a bitter laugh. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," he replied evenly. "I know you've been holding this family together by yourself for years. I know you gave up Boston and a full scholarship to care for your mother. And I know—" He paused, his voice tightening. "I know you reminded me who I used to be. That stopped me cold. What's that supposed to mean?" He stepped closer, not in an imposing way, but with the weight of someone speaking a hard truth. "When I was your age, I was broke, angry, tired of everyone telling me I didn't belong in their world. I fought my way in, but somewhere along the line, I forgot what it felt like to stand where you're standing now." I stared at him, my throat tight. "So what? You came here to save me." "No," he said quietly. "I came here to remind you that you don't need saving. You just need someone to stop the world from closing the door in your face." I sat on the edge of my worn-out sofa, staring at the cold cup of coffee Ethan had brought. The bitter smell filled the room sharp, as the thoughts spinning in my head. "I don't want pity," I said finally, my voice low but firm. "I don't want to be some project you can feel good about saving." Ethan didn't flinch. He stayed standing near the window, his hands in his pockets, waiting. "I'm offering you a chance to finish what you started," he said quietly. "Not because I think you're weak, because I know you're strong enough to do it." I let out a sharp breath, almost a laugh. "You don't know me, Ethan. You don't know what it's like to have everyone look at you and see nothing but a uniform, a paycheck, or a problem." His jaw tightened. "You're wrong about that." Something in his tone made me look up. For a second, the confident CEO was gone. I caught a glimpse of someone younger, rawer, and I wondered how much of his story he hadn't told me. Still, I wasn't about to let him dictate the rules of my life. "If I stay," I said slowly, choosing my words like stepping over broken glass, "it's not because you convinced me. It's because I want to prove I belong in that room." "You do," he said simply. I shook my head. "No, I'll stay, but only if this program is fair for everyone. No secret favors. No rescuing me when I fall. You treat me like any other candidate or I walk." Ethan's lips curved, not a smirk this time, but something closer to respect. "You drive a hard bargain, Claire Dawson." "I'm not here to bargain," I shot back. "I'm here to work." He nodded once. "Then work. And don't stop. They once called me the coffee girl." My voice felt steady in the quiet conference room, though my heart thudded like a drum in my chest. I used to clean these floors, refill the sugar packets, and pray no one noticed me standing in the corner. The junior associates stared at me from across the table, their designer pens, still their screens glowing with the contract I had just pulled apart, clause by clause. But today, I continued, I'm here to remind you that standing tall isn't about where you come from. It's about what you do when the door finally opens. It wasn't a speech I had planned. It came out raw and real, born of too many sleepless nights, and too many times I'd told myself, you're not enough. 2 years ago, I would have shrunk under their eyes. Now I didn't flinch. The deal on the table was worth millions. The opposing counsel had buried a predatory clause in the fine print, a clause no one else in the room had caught, except me. I scrolled to the section on the screen, highlighting the line in bright yellow. This isn't a minor oversight. If we let this pass, our client risks forfeiting 30% equity on a technicality, and I'm not going to let that happen. Silence. Then slowly, one of the senior partners, James, the same one who once laughed at the idea of a janitor joining their ranks, nodded. Well spotted, Dawson, he said. Proceed with your recommendation. At the back of the room, I felt a familiar pair of eyes on me. Ethan Ward. He didn't say a word, but his faint, almost imperceptible smile told me everything. 2 years can change everything. I used to come into this building with my head down, praying no one would see me. Now my name was on the door, Claire Dawson, Legal Associate. The first time I saw it etched in glass, I had to fight the lump rising in my throat. Today, I wasn't here to mop the floors. I was here to fight for people like my mother, for families who couldn't afford a voice in rooms like this. The case was brutal, a class action lawsuit against a corporation accused of evicting low-income tenants to redevelop their properties into luxury condos. The firm had taken it pro bono, but no one wanted to touch the work. Too messy, too political. I volunteered. This isn't just a legal technicality, I said, standing before a table of senior partners and junior associates. It's lives. It's children sleeping in cars because their homes were ripped out from under them. I pulled up eviction notices, translated contracts, emails that told the real story. They exploited a loophole in state law. I continued flipping through a stack of documents. But if we argue breach of implied covenant of good faith, we can hold them accountable. There was a pause. Then, one of the older partners, the same man who once voted to reassign me to the archives, cleared his throat. She's right, he said. Let's proceed. I didn't smile. Not yet, because there was still work to do. From the corner, I caught Ethan watching quietly, his arms folded. His eyes weren't full of pride or approval. They held something deeper respect. And this time, I knew I'd earned it. The room was quiet, except for the soft shuffle of papers and the low hum of laptops. It felt strange, sitting at the head of the table now. Stranger still to see 6 young faces looking at me with the same mix of fear and hope I'd once carried. The Legal Fellows program had grown beyond anything Ethan or I imagined. Every year, we brought in a handful of people from places no one expected. Single moms, immigrant students, former janitors like me. People with fire in their eyes, and the odds stacked against them. Today, I was leading their orientation. A girl sitting near the end of the table raised her hand. She couldn't have been more than 20, her notebook open and pen poised like every word might change her life. "Ms. Dawson," she said softly, "what changed your life?" For a moment I froze. The memories came rushing back, nights scrubbing floors with blistered hands, my mother's frail fingers squeezing mine in a hospital room, Ethan's voice in that dingy apartment. You reminded me who I used to be. But more than anything, I remembered the night I stood in a boardroom full of people who thought I was invisible and refused to bow my head. I looked at the girl and smiled, not the polite smile I used to fake, but a real one, steady and sure. The moment I refused to bow my head, I said, "That's when everything changed." I let the words sink in. "You'll be tested here," I continued. "People will doubt you, dismiss you, tell you that you don't belong. Don't listen. You belong the moment you decide you do." At the back of the room, I felt Ethan's gaze on me. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. We'd come full circle, and now it was my turn to hold the door open for someone else. I used to think life was about waiting for someone to open a door for you. I'd stand in the shadows holding my breath, praying that one day someone important would notice me, that they'd see past the uniform, the tired eyes, the calloused hands, and say, You deserve a chance." But that day never came. Not until I stopped waiting. The night Ethan Ward tossed me that contract and said, "If you're so smart, then translate it." I didn't realize what was really happening. It wasn't a test of language. It was a test of courage. Could I speak up in a room where I wasn't supposed to exist? Could I trust my voice when every rule of the world told me to stay quiet? I was terrified, but I spoke anyway, and it changed everything. There's a moment I keep coming back to. It wasn't the applause after my first big case. It wasn't seeing my name etched in glass outside my office. It was my mother's hand, frail and trembling, gripping mine in a hospice room. "You don't have to do it all alone, Claire," she whispered. "But never, ever let them make you small." She didn't live to see me become a lawyer. But every time I walk into a boardroom now, every time I stand beside someone who's been told you don't belong, I feel her there. And I remind myself, we don't fight because it's easy. We fight because someone has to. If you're listening to this, maybe you know what it feels like to be overlooked, to be underestimated, to have people smile at you like they're being kind, while quietly shutting every door in your face. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're wondering if it's worth it to keep trying. Let me tell you something I wish someone had told me back then. You're not invisible. Your worth isn't decided by a title or a paycheck or the clothes you wear to work. It's decided by how many times you stand back up after the world pushes you down. It's decided the moment you refuse to bow your head. I wasn't the smartest in my fellowship class. I wasn't the most polished. But I worked harder than anyone else in that room, not because I wanted to prove them wrong, but because I wanted to prove myself right. And somewhere along the way, I realized the fight isn't just for me. It's for every kid who grows up thinking people like us don't get seats at the table. It's for every parent working double shifts so their children can dream bigger. It's for you. Because if you're listening, then maybe you're already braver than you know. So people ask me now, what was the moment that changed your life? They expect me to say the Legal Fellows Program or Ethan Ward or winning my first big case. But it wasn't any of those things. It was the night I decided to stop shrinking. The night I realized I didn't have to ask for permission to take up space. So when they ask, I tell them this. The moment I refused to bow my head, that's when everything began.